Today's guest on the podcast is Davies MW, looking ahead to the Cognac Show. We discuss her origins in the wine world and transition across into the spirits world. We talk differing culture in the wine and spirit world, how the two industries communicate with the end consumer. We get into the current health of the market and the Cognac Show itself, before finishing with an early morning tasting of a Prunier cognac. Enjoy.
So I'm Dawn Davies. I am a Master of Wine and also the Spirits Buyer for the Whisky Exchange. So I started in the industry 20 years ago, which is now a very long time. I keep saying 10 years, but 10 years has increased quite quickly. I started in restaurants. I was a sommelier. So I worked for Zuma. I opened Zuma, Boxwood Cafe with Gordon, then into the Square, and then I opened around the Ledbury for 2 years and sort of really had a massive passion for wine. I mean, wine will always be my first love. Then decided I'd had enough of working 90 hours a week. So I thought I'd work for Selfridges for 9 years. So I was their head buyer, only working 60 hours a week. That was much more of an improvement. And loved it. And that's where I sort of started really getting into spirits. Just really sort of, it's such a dynamic and a vibrant category. I love wine, but I think wine can slightly be sometimes a bit static and a little bit sort of still in the past, whereas spirits, you see a real momentum forward. And after 9 years, I thought, okay, enough of Selfridges, or if they've had enough of me. And I joined Secunda at the Whisky Exchange, Secunda and Raj. And it has been an upward learning curve. I love to learn. So, you know, here you really are working with some of the experts in the spirit industry, and, you know, really become massively passionate about spirits. And wine will definitely always be my first love, but there's some very, very, very interesting things happening in the spirit world. And, you know, cognac's one of those categories that is starting to move forward and really sort of take people's, you know, they're really starting to challenge things, which I think is really, really interesting, and it's an exciting time for the category.
But yeah, you actually raise a really interesting point for me, and it's one that I guess I've come across and seen more from the outside in, and I'm hoping maybe you might be able to give me, you know, a little sort of insight, really, kind of from the inside. Is that kind of difference between the wine world and the spirits world, and maybe even sort of the culture, you know, more, you know, in terms of the things you spoke about there about, you know, being quite fast moving, and yeah, I guess just if you would just sort of riff on that a little bit. So I remember sort of 2 years ago, 2 and a bit years ago, we started doing our Master of Wine Symposium, and people said to me, you know, what do you know, you're part of the committee, looking at who we should get on board to do the speeches and the talks. And I said, I really think we should get someone from the spirit industry in, because this is an industry that has a lot more money than wine. So, you know, there is an advantage to that, because actually spirit production, to get the basic of product, okay, let's take away all the aging and everything, which is, you know, hugely complex and it does take time and money. But actually the base product is quick to produce, and you can produce it on quite a large scale. You know, wine, you're much more dependent on vintage, and you know, you're held to the land a lot more, and there's a lot more risk to a degree. I'm not saying there's no risk in spirits, but I think that also allows for a lot more flexibility. And I think what the spirit industry has done that the wine industry hasn't done is it's talking to a younger consumer. And, you know, I really feel that the wine industry could learn a hell of a lot from the spirit industry. Because I think, you know, if you look at packaging, if you look at, you know, what they're doing in terms of liquid, the innovations, it's never standing still what they're doing with cocktails. You know, if you want to engage a consumer at the moment, you talk to them through the bartenders. And the wine industry hasn't quite got that yet. And much as I think, yes, of course, both industries can learn from each other, I think there is this lack of sort of dynamism. I think it is starting to come through now with the younger winemakers. You know, if you look at South Africa and how exciting that is at the moment, parts of Australia, that, you know, you've got this real movement of something different happening in wine, which is great. I think there is something about that sort of mass market appeal in spirits, and how to talk to a consumer without having snobbery, which I think there is still a lot of in the wine world. I think we have a tendency to think no one knows as much as us. Well, a consumer doesn't need to know about the soil and whatever. They just want to know if it tastes good. And I think that the spirit world is a lot better at talking to a younger demographic than the wine world. And I'll probably get shot for that, but I think it's hugely important to recognise.
I think what I'd also, as a follow-up question really then, is can you think of any specific examples, so that it isn't this sort of, more general point and advice? Can you, let's, it is early in the morning, so maybe thinking about something that you've seen in the spirit side that you think, why aren't they doing that on the wine side?
I think one thing that the spirit world has done quite well in talking to sort of different consumers is through packaging. I mean, when you look at sort of, let's take gin. Some of the most popular gins, are they amazing? Maybe not. But packaging-wise, they really call to a consumer. And I think if you look at a lot of wine labels still, they're still fairly traditional. They're less sort of eye-catching. And I think, if I look along a line of spirits, your eyes are drawn to them a lot more than, say, if I look along a row of wines. And I think partly that is tradition, partly, with spirits, you probably can be a bit more innovative because, for a wine label, you have to, if you're in France, you have to have certain things in it, and maybe you're restricted a little bit by appellation or what needs to be written on the label. So I think packaging is hugely important in the spirit category. I also think what they've done very, very well is they've kind of, on the sort of higher end of the market, this premium end of the market, because they can turn around things quickly, because they can sort of do small batches whenever they want, this idea of exclusivity and private cask and independent bottlers, it's making it spirit something that only I have, and the consumer likes that element of personalization, that limited edition, that whereas wine you can do it to a certain extent by potentially doing a small barrel of something, but there's not the flexibility that the spirit industry has. So I think those for me are sort of two small points, but points that really have sort of captured a consumer imagination. And also I think one thing that's done very well by the spirit world is there's a lot of these festivals out there now. So you look at, Ginapalooza, you look at London Cocktail Week, they're really talking to the consumer on quite a large scale. I think wine hasn't quite done that yet. Yeah, you have things like decanters, fine wine world, but that's very targeted to a wine consumer. I think actually the people that are doing it very, very well are people like Waitrose and their consumer evenings now and what they're doing there. I think they've really done a great job at talking to sort of a wider audience. But I think there is so much more. And also, to a degree, I think in a consumer's eyes, when you're first coming through your journey of alcohol, now I always use the analogy that, when you're a kid, you drink soft drinks or you drink sweet things. And when you start drinking alcohol, you don't want the taste of alcohol. You want the taste of something sweet. So what's the easiest thing to do? Put vodka and Coke together, or vodka and orange, because there's no taste. You get the buzz without the taste. And I think the spirit industry's been quite good because they can do very simple serves, and they're making it fun in terms of how you drink. That's why gin and tonic's so popular. Is it gin that's popular, or is it tonic that's popular? It's something to think about. And I think we would, as a wine industry, I think we'd do very well to sort of look at the cocktail culture and how popular it is right now, and really, harness it and get it. If I look at cognac's coming back in cocktails now. And I think it's a good example of how, to get consumer awareness, it's by them seeing something that they can do simply at home. And, and gin and tonic, anyone can make a gin and tonic. Anyone can make Aperol Spritz. So, yes, okay, anyone can open a bottle of wine, but there's a lot more complication there, because what do they choose? What grape varieties do they choose? We need to make wine simpler. Gin is simple. It's gin and tonic. Wine is so much more complex, and I think we have to learn to talk to the consumer in a more simplistic way, just so that we take them on the journey and understand why we love the category so much. I think there needs to be a bit more of that, a bit more passion. we're passionate to ourselves, but maybe not so much to the consumer.
And I mean, genuinely a super fascinating topic for me. I mean, I hope in my own little way I'm helping to communicate and helping the industry to communicate, simply because actually podcasting, even though it is sort of radio 2.0 and who listens to the radio anymore, it is actually super popular among the kind of younger generation, and lots been said about multitasking and kind of ADHD and always wanting to have something, and the fact that you can get it now through your phone. What do young people always have with them? They always have their phone with them. So of course videos, written word, and websites and Instagram and social media, etc. But I think it's very interesting for me that podcasting is actually reaching that younger audience as well. And I hope that in my little way, I'm helping to kind of spread the word about what the wine industry is doing to a new and younger audience. And it's very interesting to me that we've got these cognacs lined up here on the bar, and we're a few short days ahead of the Cognac shows. And that was really, again, that was the impetus for wanting to come and speak with you, because I haven't covered cognac before, and I just think it would be great to ask you, first of all, just to give us a sort of an update of kind of the health of cognac, and maybe even drawing again from the point you've just made about its appeal to the younger drinker.
So I think cognac is a story of two halves. If you look at cognac and its history, it's always, in the UK, it's had a long history. We've always been cognac drinkers, after dinner drinkers. And the premium end of cognac has been hugely important in the UK market, that XO category. Those sort of top level cognacs have always sort of formed a base of sort of after dinner drinking in the UK. Then you have the sort of the flip side of cognac. You have the Hennessy, the VS, in that mass market appeal in the US, which is incredibly important and very, very interesting. And I think, we're at a time where Trump's bringing in these ridiculous taxes and what have you, and it's going to really hit the US high volume entry level line, and it'll be very, very interesting to see what cognac does. I think the last sort of 5-10 years, cognac in the UK has taken a bit of a downturn. What we saw was the focus from the cognac houses sort of shifting to Asia, because that's where the moolah was, as it were. And now I think they've realised that actually the UK is still a hugely important market for them, and the shift has come back. And I think cognac just got a bit static for a while, and they weren't innovating, they weren't challenging themselves. And of course, cognac, like any other wine region in France, is governed by AOP laws, and those laws regulate what they can and can't do. But what you're now seeing is this slow movement in cognac of people really starting to challenge, to shift, to ask questions, to look at the wider spirit world and say, do you know what, there's a lot of things that are really interesting that we could do. And I think this was when we started, Sukhinder and I started looking at doing a cognac show. It was that innovation, and we were starting to see, cognac springing up in cocktails, in bars, some of the old classics coming back, like the Sazerac and the Sidecar. And, we thought, this is interesting. There's something happening here. And what we've really seen in the last, I would say, 5 years is a very slow sort of starting to churn. You can see packaging's changing. A lot of houses are bringing out cognacs that are designed for bartenders. So if you look, Frappin launched one last year. We've seen Hein as well, H. Hein, very much doing a sort of a cognac that's designed for a bartender to use in a cocktail at a good price, with a nice flavor profile. And cognac's got this fruitiness, this inherent fruitiness that comes from the grapes that does make it very, very good in cocktails. And then we're also seeing this other side, people like Alexandre, who is the owner of Ferrand Cognac. He's playing around with different oak. He's done a Sauterne cask finish. So at the moment in cognac, you're allowed to use wine, anything that's held wine in it before, but you can't do anything else. But what he's doing is actually playing around and experimenting with other oaks. So, he looked at the history. He's gone very much back into the history of cognac and seen that they were using acacia wood, cherry wood, chestnut, and he's been starting to play with those. Now, he's not allowed to legally call them cognac yet, but he's saying, look, these things were used. And he's done a lot of sort of what we call finishing on cognacs, and they're delicious. They're really interesting. And he does a renegade range where he does play around with a lot of these sort of flavors. It's not called a cognac, but it is definitely cognac in profile. Martell launched Swift last year. Swift is a spirit eau de vie because it's actually aged in bourbon barrels, so finished in bourbon barrels, which is not legal because it didn't hold wine in it before. And great for the bars. Talk to the bars and that sort of younger consumer in a language they understand. Bourbon's on fire right now. Of course, talk bourbon. Let the consumer understand. We need that young consumer. We need that sort of consumer that's going to go on the journey and end up drinking XOs. It's super important. And you see that. There's a lot of innovation from bartenders. There's a bar now in Cognac called Bar Luciole, who's actually going to be at Cognac Show next weekend. And Guillaume, who's the head bartender there, amazing, doing some just cognac cocktails. Really, he came last year and we did a cocktail bar, and it was brilliant. Just testing some of the things he's doing, and he's an amazing palate, really, really good, great guy. And there was a lot of excitement in the bar industry around cognac at the moment. So. But then on the flip side, there's this really still very much this traditional kind of feel to it. Within that tradition, they are looking at sort of the quality. So they're looking at the grapes. So Colombard's making a reappearance. Faux Blanche is making a reappearance. So, I think there's still, at the core, they're still doing a lot of very, very interesting things that are part of the tradition and the history, and bringing back a little bit more of this, almost in the way that whiskey does, is that sort of that limited edition. A lot of this we're starting to see indie bottlers coming through. So there's an amazing indie bottler, French bottler called Through the Grapevine, which is La Maison de Whisky Paris, and they do some stunning ranges in there, and they're, it's all single barrel or a small batch, and again, really interesting. We just launched Frappan last year. We did a single cask with Frappan, and we want to do more with that because, again, it's talking to a whiskey consumer. So I think cognac sits in quite a nice category. It can talk to a younger consumer through cocktails and easy drinking styles, but at the same time, you have this real element of quality. So at Cognac Show, we're going to be having what we call dream drams, which are, ones that you pay tokens for at a very, very top level. So there's some 1950s Martell, and when you taste some of those old cognacs, they're absolutely amazing. So it's a game of two halves, I think, and what actually is probably missing is the bit in between. Is how do you take the sort of base consumer through to the premium consumption, and I think that's something that will come. And we are seeing sort of slow launches coming through, and at the same time you've got real quality in the vineyards. We work with a guy called Paul Giraud, who is a small grower, absolutely stunning. He works organically in the vineyards, does sort of follow some biodynamic principles, and his cognacs are the most elegant things I have ever tasted in my life. I said to him, will you adopt me? I love you so much. And he said, I'll marry you. And I was like, maybe not. So, I think you have people like him doing some great things. And then people like Valentin Tersinier, who do a brother and sister who do some of the most intense cognacs, really beautiful fruit. So you're trying the Napoleon from Paul Giraud, and he's just got this elegance and lightness of touch, which is just absolutely fantastic. I think it's definitely what I would call a feminine cognac, if I'm allowed to use those terms in Me Too moments. And then you've sort of got Valentin Tersinier, which is hugely sort of fruity, and they're using terms that use in cognac, in whiskey, things like small batch. These are things that different consumers from different categories understand, these terminologies. And I think they're there's some beautiful liquid in cognac, and I think it's definitely one that we want to encourage people to explore. So we've got 33 producers coming along to Cognac Show next weekend. So a lot of cognac to try.
Okay, perfect. And I think just before we kind of, get into the glass, as it were, and, get into more about the Cognac Show and what people can kind of find there, I think we would just like to have, 2 to 3 minutes on what cognac is, its processes, and maybe, also a little bit about what kind of, I guess, separates mass market and a larger volume cognac from the more premium stuff.
So cognac inherently is a brandy. It's a grape spirit that's aged minimum for 2 years, and it's based in the north of Bordeaux, right on near the coast. So you do have coastal influences into the vineyards in the same way as you would do in Bordeaux. Similar climate, and essentially it's a blend of grapes. The predominant one, though, is Uni Blanc. So you can use Uni Blanc, Fol Blanche, Colombard. There's others as well, but Uni Blanc has become the main varietal that they use. And it is a distilled spirit. So first you produce your low alcohol wine or a lower ABV wine. And then it goes into the stills and is distilled in a pot still. So a pot still gives you quite a rich, heavy character in your spirit, and it's a double distillation process. So for example, the difference between that and Armagnac tends to be a heavier, more sort of, I think the term is rustic. It's a more masculine spirit because it's a single distillation, as just an example of how they differ. Within cognac, you have regions such as Grand Champagne, Bombois, Borderies, Petit Champagne, and you definitely get characters from those. So, what I love about cognac is you do get a sense of terroir coming through. A lot of them blend between regions, and what you find is you have sort of the very big houses that are doing sort of more of the mass market, the VS. So you have different ages in cognac. You have VS. You have VSOP, which has to be aged for 4 years. You have XO, which at the moment has to be aged for 10, but the law is changing, so they're going to have to age it up to 10 years now. So it was 6, they're going to 10 years. And then you have things like Napoleon, Audage, which are all, again, older style cognacs. There is sort of, you can only use oak to age. Most of the oak comes from Limousin. It's a very tight grain oak. So you get quite a lot of lovely spices coming through on that. They do use Trancet and other places, but Limousin is the classic oak of cognac. And it's a blended product, essentially. You blend between ages. You do get vintage cognacs, but it's quite rare. For example, Prunier does quite a lot of vintages. Hein does a vintage range. But there's a lot of very, very strict laws in place, so it tends to be more of a blended product. And it's one of those ones that on the sort of the VS, the lighter side styles, those are the ones you see in the mass market. Those are the ones that are Hennessy is, the 85% of the cognac market in the US. And that's the one that's, used in mixing, and it's the one that you can play around a lot more with. Cognac was actually, as you go up the range up into your XOs more for your sort of your brown spirit drinker, your whiskey drinker, the person that wants something as more of an after dinner sort of treat as it were. And I think it's as sort of as cognac develops, we'll see a lot more kind of different styles. So, for example, Frappin's just launched one last year that was, again, made more for the bartender. We're seeing a little bit more of that sort of entry to midpoint level coming through now. And as I said, there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of people that sort of, Fanny Fougereau, for example, there's a lot of, in cognac, it's a little bit like champagne. It's made up of a lot of growers who then sell either their grapes to cooperatives or to the houses. The houses then buy from the cooperatives. There's not a lot of people that own their own land only. So Frappin's one of those ones that harvest from their own. Hein has a lot of vineyards. A lot of people buy either the distilled spirit and then age and blend, or they buy the grapes from different growers, and a lot of these growers are now starting to do their own cognac. So Fanny Fougera is amazing. Her family has been growers for decades, generations, and she's now just started to launch her own range. And it's so nice to see that coming through. Is that kind of cognacs was always seen as quite a big mass market. The big houses dominated, and what we're now seeing is this movement towards, I don't like the word craft, but the smaller grower operators, which is fantastic.
So to me, it's really interesting to kind of then tie that into what you were talking about earlier in terms of, wine and its culture being based around that kind of one shot per year, one vintage per year. And then you spoke about the spirits being a bit more kind of freer, I guess, maybe not the right word, but just because they have more chances, they can take more risks, if you like, because of the nature of procuring the base ingredients and the way that it's made. I'm wondering then, so given that we're talking about a product, cognac, that relies on wine, that is made in wine regions, how do they sit then? Are they in a sort of in a place? And this is, of course, a very general question. Are they sort of in a place where they're then sitting on a lot of wine and they're then able to use that to kind of experiment with and be sort of quite creative with, or are they in a sense sort of more constrained in terms of having that base ingredient only really being available once a year?
It's quite an interesting question. As I think, yes, there's a constraint, because what you are actually constrained by in the majority is, in the main, is the vintage. So I think it was 2 years ago they had a lot of hail, a lot of problems with damage and rot in the grapes. So that they have that constraint that the wine growers have that are making wine, because if you have a poor harvest, you don't have as much volume. I quite like to think of cognac a little bit like champagne. I think they're quite similar in style, because once you get your grapes in, you distill it. That distillation isn't going to go off. So, you put it into barrel, you can age it. And that, like champagne, you can even out. And that's why, they're blended, mainly blended products. So think of your cognacs as your non-vintage champagnes. You're evening out any variation or any issues, or if you have a poor harvest, if you think champagne, if they're limited with how much they can pick depending on the season. If they have a poor harvest one year, then they may have had a good harvest the year before and they were allowed to pick more, which means they could keep more of their reserve wines. So then they'll just blend in more reserve wine into the cuvée. And for me, that's how to think of cognac, in a very similar way to champagne. So yes, they still have distilled spirit. They can still increase volumes and decrease volumes and play around when they need, but they are still tied to the fact that, unlike, say, grain, grain, you buy it from Siberia or wherever. If you have a poor harvest in the UK, you can go to Canada and buy as much, fill your boots. And there isn't this vintage variation. You're not tied to a product that is so susceptible to weather. And the cognac growers will have as many problems as the wine growers. They have to look at sugar levels, they have to look at acidity levels, because actually they need a certain type of grape, or they need a certain product in order to make a good cognac. So it is vinous in that terms, and I think that's why probably I love cognac, is that you do have this this vinous quality that does come through into the final product. But for me, I would liken cognac to champagne. I think it's the easiest way of getting your head round. So the cognac you're tasting at the moment is from the house of Prunier, and Prunier is quite an interesting cognac house. They're not a producer. They don't buy their own grapes or sort of make it in the same way as, say, Hein or Hennessy or what have you. He's actually more like a négociant. That's how I kind of like to see him. And Stefan, who's the gentleman behind it, he comes from a wine background, actually. He used to work up in Burgundy. So, and he thinks in a very sort of wine-like way. So he's gone around, he buys liquid from different houses, different growers, and then actually ages it himself. And what I find with his wines, and he does a lot of vintages, and I think, you know, that's where he's quite interesting, and sort of small parcels of things. And with his cognacs, you always get this huge richness. I mean, they're quite big, rich, quite sort of spice-driven cognacs. I mean, if you compare it to Paul Giroux, who's very light and elegant, sort of Prunier's on the other side of the spectrum, the big beasts, but he gets these really beautiful flavors from them, and I quite like what he's doing. I like this idea of a bit of a négociant, and really sort of taking care of the cognacs and really selecting the best. You know, he can go out there and he works very closely with, you know, the same growers, but he goes and actually sources the liquid he feels is the best to become a vintage or a blend of 20 years, a 20-year-old cognac. So he's doing some very interesting things, and I think that there's that nice sort of character juxtaposition between a small little grower who's doing everything himself to some guy who's actually going out and buying the liquid and aging, and then in between you have sort of that Valentinier, which is that family-owned, slightly larger larger company, and there's so much flavor variation in cognac. You know, I think people just think, oh, it's cognac, it all tastes the same. Each house is very, very particular about their blending, and you know, we can look at the big houses and say, oh, they're a big house, but I'm sorry, Louis XIII is absolutely incredible. You know, if you're lucky enough to be able to try it. And you know, I've been in the cellars and tasted from barrel, and the liquid is absolutely incredible. And I think with old cognac, you really get these very interesting tertiary characters in the same way as you would with a very sort of complex old wine.
I've got to say, I've got the tasting smile on my face. I'll often refer to wines as smiley wines for me. I just have them and I've got a massive smile on my face, and I've definitely got that here with these cognacs, and I have been spinning before anybody sort of messages me. And yeah, I just think it really, at the end of the day, it's a drink. You know, much as I love hearing you or, you know, any of the other sort of wine or spirits experts that I have on talk, I just think at the end of the day, you've got to have it there in the glass in front of you, and it's just, you know, a very pleasurable experience. You know, I think the complexity. I mean, certainly of having the Prunier here in the glass, you know, certainly, you know, picking up a lot of that spice that you referred to, and it's just sort of thinking out loud. Really, it's just interesting that you have the sort of the négociant, and I'm just sort of, you know, getting my head, I guess, around the differences between the wine industry and the cognac industry, where, you know, in wine, a négociant would be buying grapes, you know, that seem, or the ones at least that I've come across, more than buying wine and sort of blending wines. That seems to be less common, even if it is a thing whatsoever. So, but yeah, it just seems very interesting that here, you know, you've got the distilled spirit, and yeah, it's almost, you know, thinking back to the earlier question about, you know, what are they doing, and kind of what is each individual kind of sitting on it. It's then almost seems to give like a secondary life to what they have, because I guess somebody like Prunier is you know, outside of, you know, is not directly in the cognac houses, and I guess is, you know, just bringing a different perspective, you know, isn't you know, so inward looking, and perhaps is bringing all of these different elements of those distillates together, and can kind of pick and choose and can make something different, you know, something that's new and is just delicious. You know, this word delicious, you know, I'm glad that it seems to be coming way more into like the sommelier lexicon, because at the end of the day, you know, I think that's what people want. They want something that tastes good, they want something that has got a story, but at the end of the day, you can't drink a story. What's in the glass has got to taste good. It's got to have its place. And I could certainly just imagine myself now sitting back after a meal and just really this is just would, I think, put me in just a very super relaxed and very happy frame of mind. So I look forward to being able to drink this at some point in the future. So I think it's been really fantastic just to sort of dip my toe in the world of cognac, as it were. And I think it's just great because you've got, and Whiskey Exchange as a company has got this event coming up so soon, which I'll be editing the podcast and having it out there in time for people to listen to in advance. So just let people know some more of the details about the show and how they can get involved.
So the show takes place on the 26th and 27th. We're running a trade trade day on the Friday afternoon, and then we'll go into a consumer session in the evening, and then 2 consumer sessions on the Saturday. So during the day and then one in the evening. And there's still tickets on sale. We have an amazing lineup. There's about 33 houses taking part. We're having master classes. We'll have food pairings. We'll have 101 sessions, so you can really get to grips with cognac. A lot of the producers are coming over. There's going to be a cocktail bar, so you can really see how you can use cognac in cocktails. Martel's going to be doing pancakes, which is really fun. Remy Martin is going to be doing a sort of immersive experience, which again, it's just a really sort of fun and engaging way of understanding and maybe starting to dip your toe into cognac. Also, there's a lot of bars in London that are going to take part in what we're calling the Cognac Weekender, which is run by Drink Up London. And so you can go, you get a wristband and you can go get a cognac cocktail for £6 in many of these bars around London. So it's a really immersive sort of, we've taken it from a very small little show, and we're taking over London one step at a time, and then we're going to take over the world after that. So this is a really, really, really good opportunity to really start to understand cognac. I mean, some of the people that are taking part are really fascinating, and what's nice is you can taste from the big houses that are doing a lot of kind of quirky fun things, down to these small little growers who are producing just great liquid. So for me, it's a really, really good opportunity just to kind of really explore cognac and learn about it, but in a really fun, engaging environment.
Thank you so much, Dawn. It was lovely having you on and to be able to communicate your passion for cognac and the Cognac Show. I've left details below, both of the Whiskey Exchange and of the Cognac Show. And if today's episode has piqued your interest, then do get along and let me know what the experience is like. And of course, do follow along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, or email me hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.